When my daughter-in-law told me to leave, I didn't argue, I didn't cry, I just smiled, nodded, and said, "Of course, sweetheart." That was the moment my whole world shifted. It wasn't said with anger, not even frustration, just calm, careful words, spoken like someone who'd practiced them in her head a few times before finally letting them out. "Mom," she said softly, "maybe it's time for you to have your own space." It sounded polite, it sounded kind, but it also sounded final. I stood there in the kitchen that evening, the smell of dinner still hanging in the air. The house was warm, the light from the sunset spilling through the curtains in soft orange streaks. It looked peaceful, like the kind of peace you feel after everyone else has stopped talking. I remember touching the edge of the counter just to keep my hands steady. My coffee had gone cold, and for a long time I didn't say a word. She waited. I think she wanted me to say something, maybe argue or pretend I didn't understand, but I did. I understood perfectly, so I gave her a small smile, the kind mothers give when they're trying not to break, and I said, "You're right, dear. Maybe it is time." Then I went to my room, closed the door quietly, and sat on the bed that I had helped pay for when they bought this house. I stared at the photos on the dresser, pictures of our little family, my son Daniel, his wife Emily, and their baby, my sweet granddaughter Sophie. They all looked so happy in those photos. I was there too, off to the side, smiling, the kind of smile that hides how tired you are, but how grateful you feel just to be part of their world. That night, I could hear them talking in the kitchen, not loudly, just soft voices, the kind couples use when they're careful not to start an argument. "She means well," Daniel said. "I know," Emily replied, "but I just need to feel like this is our home again." Those words, "our home again," echoed in my head for hours. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, realizing that somewhere along the way I had stopped being part of Or. I wasn't always the quiet woman people see now. Once I was full of life, a wife, a mother, a teacher, a woman with plans. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, met my husband when I was 22. We didn't have much, but we had laughter, and that was enough. When our son Daniel was born, it felt like the world had given me its most precious gift. He was a gentle boy, soft-spoken, thoughtful, always quick to say thank you. My husband used to say, "Hayes got your heart and my stubbornness." He was right. But life has a way of testing even the strongest hearts. My husband passed away when Daniel was 15, sudden heart failure. One minute we were eating dinner, the next, he was gone. That night, our house went quiet, the kind of quiet that sinks into your bones. I had to be strong. There was no one else to hold things together. So I got a second job, worked long hours, and made sure Daniel still had everything he needed. We leaned on each other. He'd tell me, "Don't worry, Mom. I'll take care of you one day," and I'd laugh, brush his hair back, and say, "Just be happy, that's all I need." Our years passed, and Daniel grew into a kind young man. He went to college, got a good job in the city, and started a life of his own. I was proud, so proud. When he told me he'd met someone, I could hear the smile in his voice even through the phone. "She's amazing, Mom," he said. "You'll love her," and I did. Emily was sweet, polite, full of energy. The first time she came home to meet me, she helped set the table, complimented my cooking, and called me Mom before dessert was even served. I remember thinking, she's the daughter I never had. When they got married, I cried like any mother would, happy tears, because I knew my son had found love, the kind that would make him whole again. After a couple of years, Emily gave birth to Sophie, my little sunshine. When I first held that baby in my arms, I felt my heart fill with a joy I hadn't felt in years. Her tiny fingers wrapped around mine, and I whispered, "You're my second chance at motherhood." Emily asked me to stay with them for a while to help out. Of course, I said yes. I packed a small suitcase, thinking I'd stay a few weeks. But a few weeks turned into months, and then years. At first, everything felt perfect. We were one big family under one roof. I cooked, cleaned, babysat, and tried to make life easier for them. I'd hum old songs while folding laundry. Emily would laugh and say, "Mom, you make this place feel like home." Those were good days, busy, loud, full of love. But slowly, almost quietly, things began to change. Not all at once, just little moments that started to sting. Like the time she told me not to add sugar to Sophie's oatmeal, or when she rewashed the dishes I'd already cleaned, or when she began to say, "It's okay, Mom, I'll do it," more and more often. They were small things, but each one chipped away at something inside me. Daniel didn't notice much. He worked long hours, came home tired, kissed Sophie goodnight, and went straight to his laptop. When I tried to talk to him about how I felt, he'd say, "Mom, you're overthinking. Emily loves you." I wanted to believe that. I really did. But sometimes love doesn't disappear through anger. Sometimes it just fades through distance, through polite smiles and closed doors. I remember one night, I overheard them talking again. It wasn't an argument, just a quiet conversation in the living room after dinner. Emily said, "I feel like I can't breathe sometimes. I love her, but I just want to make our own memories, you know." Daniel said, "I understand. I'll talk to her." I didn't wait to hear the rest. I went to my room, closed the door, and sat on the bed until the house went silent again. That night, I cried into my pillow quietly because I didn't want anyone to hear. The next morning, I woke up early and made pancakes. It was Sophie's favorite breakfast. When she ran into the kitchen yelling, "Grandma, pancakes," I smiled and handed her a plate with extra syrup. For a moment, everything felt like it used to. Emily came in too, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. She thanked me for breakfast, then started washing the dishes I'd just done. That's when I knew something had shifted beyond repair. So later that day, I started packing small things, a sweater, a few books, my knitting bag, not to leave yet, just to prepare. A mother always knows when the goodbye is coming, even before it's spoken aloud. A week later, the words came. We were in the kitchen after dinner. Sophie had already gone to bed. Emily sat across from me, her hands folded neatly on the table. "Mom," she said softly, "you've been such a blessing to us. I don't know how we would have managed without you. But Daniel and I talked, and we think maybe it's time for you to have your own space." Oh, for a second, the world went completely still. Even the clock on the wall seemed to stop ticking. I looked at her, this woman I had once called my daughter, and I saw the truth in her eyes. It wasn't anger. It wasn't resentment. It was exhaustion, the quiet exhaustion of someone trying to build her own life while still sharing it with someone else's past. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to say, "After everything I've done for you," but I didn't. Instead, I nodded and said, "Of course, sweetheart," because love, real love, sometimes means stepping away so others can breathe. That night, I walked through the house touching everything lightly, the baby's blanket, the photo frames, the kitchen counter. I whispered a small thank you to each room, and when I reached Sophie's crib, I kissed her forehead and whispered, "Grandma's gonna rest for a little while. Be good for Mama." Then I sat by the window until dawn, watching the first light of morning fall over the house I was about to leave. When the taxi came the next day, Daniel looked confused. "Mom, what's going on?" I smiled, my suitcase already by the door. "Just taking a little break, honey. You two need some time together." He frowned. "Did Emily say something?" I shook my head. "No, sweetheart, she didn't have to." He hugged me tightly, and in that hug, I felt everything we didn't say. His guilt, my sadness, and the love still holding us together. Even as I was about to walk away, Emily came to the door holding Sophie. She looked nervous, maybe even regretful. I smiled at her and said, "Thank you for everything. You've been a wonderful daughter." She whispered, "You've been wonderful too, Mom." Then Sophie reached out to me and said, "Grandma, stay." I kissed her little cheek and whispered, "Soon, baby. Grandma just needs to rest." Then I turned, stepped into the taxi, and closed the door gently. I didn't look back, because if I did, I knew I wouldn't have the strength to leave. As the car pulled away, I watched the houses pass by. Neat lawns, white fences, families inside preparing for another ordinary day. For me, it was anything but ordinary. The city lights faded in the mirror, and I whispered to myself, "This isn't the end. It's just another kind of beginning." I told myself I would only stay at the inn for 1 week, maybe 2. I said it out loud when I unpacked my small suitcase, as if the room needed to hear it too. 1 week, I whispered, just a little rest. The bed had a patchwork quilt with tiny blue squares. The window looked out over a narrow street with maple trees. In the evening, the leaves made a soft rustling sound, like quiet applause for anyone who had the courage to start over. The first night was the hardest. No baby monitor, no dishwasher humming, no late footsteps in the hallway, just the clock on the wall and my breath in the dark. I kept reaching for my phone. I kept waiting for a message that said, "Come home." It didn't come. I turned the phone face down on the nightstand, then turned it face up again. I do not know how long I lay there, but I remember the first pale light coming through the curtains and the taste of tears that had dried on my lips. Martha, the innkeeper, knocked at 8. Her voice was gentle. "Coffee's on." "Sweetheart." I washed my face, tied my hair back, and followed the smell of coffee to the little kitchen. The window over the sink looked out at a tiny backyard with a crooked bird feeder. "Hungry?" she asked. "Not yet," I said. "Maybe later." She poured me a cup and sat down. "We'll keep it simple here. Slow mornings, small chores." "A walk if the weather's kind." I nodded. "Slow sounds good," I said, though the word scared me a little. Slow meant there would be space to think. Space for all the thoughts I had pushed away while folding laundry and stirring pots and saying, "I'm fine, I'm fine." The first days passed like careful steps on thin ice. I helped Martha with breakfast, sliced fruit, toast, scrambled eggs. I carried plates to a couple from out of town and smiled when they said the town was charming. I wiped tables, rinsed mugs, and stood at the window in the quiet moments, watching the same sparrow hop along the fence. "Let me pay you," Martha joked once. "You already do," I said. "You let me keep my hands busy." Well, afternoons I walked. There was a small lake at the edge of town. The path around it was easy, with benches every few yards. I sat on one bench and watched the water crease and smooth again under the breeze. Ducks glided in a small line, the last one working hard to keep up. I whispered, "You can do it," and felt silly, then felt better. I passed a playground. A little boy ran to the swings and shouted, "Higher, Daddy!" The father laughed and pushed, and the boy flew forward with his legs out like a little diver. I smiled for them, then kept walking, my hands tucked into my sleeves. I called Daniel on the 4th day. I had told myself I would wait, let him be the one, but waiting became its own kind of ache. He answered and said my name like a breath. "Mom, hi, honey, how are you?" "We're okay," he said. "Work is a lot." "Emily, oh, she's okay too." I waited. He added, "Sophia saying new words every day." My heart lifted. "What did she say today?" He laughed. "She said moon cheese." We were reading a book about the moon. I closed my eyes and pictured her small hands turning pages. "That's wonderful." He hesitated. "You doing all right?" "I'm trying," I said. "I'm taking walks, helping a little." "That sounds good," he said, and I could hear his keyboard clicking. "I won't keep you," I added quickly. "Just wanted to hear your voice." "We'll come by soon," he said. "I'd like that." I whispered. We hung up, and the quiet came back like a tide. The next morning it rained, soft, steady rain. I stood at the back door and watched it make small rings on a puddle. Rain and tea go together. So I made a pot and sat with my hands wrapped around the cup. I thought about the last rainy day at the house, Sophie at the window tapping the glass. Racing raindrops, I had said. She had laughed and pointed, "Mine wins." I let the memory stay. I didn't push it away this time. I sat with it until it felt like a warm blanket rather than a weight. Martha had a corkboard by the kitchen with notes pinned to it. Yoga classes, a flyer for a community dinner. Another for a volunteer sign-up at the daycare 2 blocks over. "Take one," she said, seeing me red, "maybe." I answered, "Maybe I will." I stared at the daycare flyer that night. My hands knew the work. 100 tiny tasks, 100 tiny kindnesses. But my heart hesitated. Would it feel like replacing what I had lost? Or would it feel like remembering how to love without leaning? I put the flyer in my purse. The daycare director's name was Linda. She was tall with tired eyes that still sparkled when a child laughed. "We can always use more hands," she told me. "What do you need?" I asked. She smiled. "Patience. And someone to sit on the floor for story time without minding the creaky knees." I laughed, and it came out lighter than I expected. "I can do that," I said. She put me on the schedule for 2 mornings a week. "Start small," she said. "Let the joy find you." The first day, a little girl with a red bow climbed into my lap during the very hungry caterpillar. She pressed her cheek to my shoulder like she had always known me. Her trust broke something open. I read slowly, showing each picture, and when I reached the butterfly, 3 little voices whispered, "Wow." I whispered it too. At the inn, I learned the rhythm of empty rooms and brief stays. New faces, new stories, each one passing through like a soft breeze. An older couple celebrated their 50th anniversary. A mother and daughter argued quietly at breakfast and made up over pancakes the next morning. A traveling nurse left a thank you note on the table. "Your coffee saved my day." I pinned it to the corkboard. I also learned the rhythm of my own days: morning coffee with Martha, a walk, a call to the library to ask about the book club, a text to Daniel that said, "Thinking of you," and sometimes, if I was brave, "Kiss Sophie for me." He always wrote back. Sometimes it was a photo Sophie with crayons, Sophie with spaghetti on her chin, Sophie in yellow boots. I saved every picture to a folder labeled Sunshine, and then still the ache returned at night. It came when the house went quiet and the hall light clicked off. I lay in bed and heard again the sentence that had changed everything. "Maybe it's time for you to have your own space." The words were not cruel, they were careful, but careful can still cut. I replayed the small moments that led to that day. The oatmeal I sweetened when I should not have, the sweater I washed the wrong way, the advice I offered when no one asked. It was easy to count my clumsy steps. It was harder to count the love I had given, because love doesn't stack neatly. It spills, it soaks in, it disappears into the fabric of a day. On one of those nights, I sat up and turned on the lamp. I took out a notebook from my purse and wrote, "What is my job now?" I stared at the words for a long time. Then I wrote, "To love without crowding, to bless from the doorway and know when to step back. I closed the notebook and turned off the lamp. My chest felt less tight. I slept. A week later, the daycare held a family morning. Parents and grandparents were invited to sing and paint. I wore my blue sweater and brought oatmeal cookies. As the children stamped their hands in paint, I felt a tug on my sleeve. Miss May, one boy whispered, "Can you hold my paper?" I held the paper. He pressed his green hand down and looked at the mark he had made. "Look," he said, "it's me." "Yes," I said, "it's you." His smile stayed with me all day. When I came back to the inn, a small envelope waited on my pillow, no return address. Inside was a photograph of Sophie in a pink coat, standing by a pumpkin on a porch. On the back, Daniel had written, she says, "Grandma Pumpkin." I pressed the photo to my heart. I whispered thank you to a room that could not answer. I placed the picture on the dresser and sat on the edge of the bed. I did not cry. I just breathed. In and out, slow and steady. The next Sunday, I went to church with Martha. I had not gone in a while. The sanctuary smelled like wood polish and old hymnals. A child somewhere dropped a crayon and Whisper laughed. We sang a simple song about mercy. The words were small. They fit in the mouth like bread. After the service, a woman with silver hair touched my arm. "You're new," she said. "I'm visiting," I answered. She smiled. "I hope you visit again." Outside, the sky was the color of clean cotton. I felt light enough to walk the long way home. I was carrying a small bag of apples when my phone buzzed. A message from Emily. It was the first one from her since I left. "Hi, Mom. Hope you're well. Do you think you could send the recipe for your chicken soup? Sophie has a cold and keeps saying grandma soup." I stopped on the sidewalk. A breeze moved the leaves across my shoes. I typed the recipe slowly, step by step, the way my own mother had taught me. At the end, I added, "Stir slowly, taste often. Hold her close while it simmers." She wrote back, "Thank you. I will." Then, after a moment, "We miss you." I stood there a long time after the message came, letting the words settle where they needed to settle. I did not rush home. I did not plan a return. I just carried the apples and my quiet happiness down the street. That night, I made the same soup for Martha and me. We ate at the small table with the bird feeder outside the window. The rain had begun again, soft, steady. "Good?" she asked. "Good," I said. We did not talk much. Sometimes peace is the space where no words are needed. The next few weeks had their own kind of rhythm. There were good days, and there were days that asked more of me. On the good days, I laughed easily. I read 2 stories at the daycare instead of 1. I wrote little notes to tuck inside the library books before I returned them. Notes that said, "If this page makes you smile, you have a kind heart." On the hard days, I did the small things. I swept the porch. I wrote a letter I did not send. I took a longer walk and counted the benches, 1, 2, 3, until my breath slowed and my thoughts untangled. I learned to hold my phone without begging it to ring. I learned to love a child I did not raise and then let him run to his own mother when she arrived. I learned that missing someone is a kind of prayer. One afternoon at the daycare, a new little girl cried and would not join circle time. She stood by the shelf with her fists tight at her sides. "May I sit with you?" I asked. She shook her head. "Okay," I said, and I sat on the floor a few feet away. I did not coax. I did not pull. I hummed very softly an old lullaby my mother used to sing. After a while, she came and placed her hand on my knee. "I'm ready," she whispered. We walked to the circle together. I thought, this is how I will love my family too. I will be close. Not pressing, just here. Daniel called on a Thursday evening. Sophie had a mild fever. "She asked for you," he said, his voice soft. She said, "Grandma." I closed my eyes. I sent the recipe to Emily. I said, "Did it help?" "It did," he answered. She fell asleep on my chest after. We were quiet for a few seconds. "Mom," he said, "I'm sorry I didn't see how hard it was for you. I should have, I don't know. I should have done more." I wanted to tell him he should have. I wanted to tell him I waited for him to stand up, to stand between. But I also saw that he had been holding many things, his job, his marriage, his fatherhood, his fear of failing at any one of them, and I loved him too much to add another weight. "You're doing your best," I said. He breathed out like he had been holding air for days. "Thank you," he whispered. Before we hung up, he said, "We were thinking maybe on Sunday we could drive over just for a little while." "Yes," I said, not too quickly. "I would like that." I cleaned my room on Saturday. I changed the pillowcases and dusted the dresser. I set the picture of Sophie next to a small vase of flowers. I baked oatmeal cookies and wrapped them in a cloth. I sat on the bed and folded my hands and told my heart, "We will be grateful. We will not rush. We will not ask for a promise. We will receive whatever the day brings." On Sunday, I watched from the window as their car parked by the curb. Sophie climbed out first in her little sneakers. She spotted me and waved both hands like small flags. "Grandma," she shouted. The word ran across the street and wrapped itself around me. I met her at the door. She smelled like crayons and apples. She pushed a paper into my hand, drawing 3 stick figures and a sun with long lines. She pointed. "That's you," she said, tapping the one with gray hair. "And that's us. It's beautiful," I said, and I meant it. Daniel hugged me. Emily stood a step back, holding a small bag with tissues and a tiny sweater. "Hi, Mom," she said. "Hi, sweetheart." For a moment, we all looked at one another, unsure of the first line of this new conversation. Then I stepped aside. "Come in," I said. I made cookies. We sat in the small kitchen with the bird feeder outside. Sophie pressed her nose to the glass and whispered, "Birds are eating." Daniel laughed. Emily smiled at Sophie's reflection in the window. I poured milk into small cups and placed the cookies on a plate. No one hurried. No one tried to fix the past in one afternoon. We ate and talked about ordinary things, shoes that never stay tied, a book Sophie loved, the way the maple leaves looked like coins in the street. After a while, Emily turned her cup in her hands and said, "The soup helped." "I'm glad," I said. She nodded. "I'm sorry," she added, her voice careful. "I tried to carry everything at once." "Me too," I said softly, "and sometimes I carried what wasn't mine." We looked at each other and our eyes said the rest. Not forgiveness in a rush, not blame in disguise, just 2 women who loved the same people and were learning a gentler way to share them. When they left, Sophie hugged me so hard her feet lifted off the floor. "Come back," she asked. I knelt and held her hands. "I will always come back to you," I said. I will always let you go when it's time." She nodded, the way children nod when they do not understand yet, but trust the person who is speaking. The car pulled away. I stood on the porch with my hand raised until it turned the corner. The street was quiet again, but the quiet felt different now. It felt like a blanket, not a wall. That night, I opened my notebook. I wrote, "Rising conflict, not a fight, but a lesson. We are all learning where to stand. Close enough to hear, far enough to breathe." I closed the notebook and turned off the lamp. Rain began again, soft and steady like a lullaby tapping the roof. I lay on my side and let it sing me to sleep. In the morning, I woke before the alarm. The sky was pale blue. I made coffee for Martha and me. I packed 2 oatmeal cookies and a napkin for the daycare staff. As I tied my shoes, I felt a small spark in my chest, like the first match in a dark room. I did not call it hope. I did not want to press it with a name. I simply carried it with me, warm and quiet, as I stepped into the day. And this is how the conflict rose, not in angry words, not in slammed doors, but in small choices and careful steps. I was still learning how to live apart without drifting away. I was still learning how to love deeply without living in the middle of someone else's life. I was still learning how to be a mother now that my child had a home of his own and a life that needed room to grow. I walked to the lake and sat on the 3rd bench, the one with a loose board. The water moved in thin lines of light. A duck lifted and landed, leaving rings that spread and thinned and vanished. I watched until the surface smoothed again. I whispered, "I know," to no one and to everything. Then I stood, brushed the leaves from my coat, and headed toward whatever came next. The morning after they visited, I woke up feeling lighter. The air in the room seemed softer somehow. For the first time in months, I didn't wake with that heavy ache in my chest. I made my bed, opened the curtains, and watched the sunlight slide across the floorboards. It was an ordinary morning, quiet, unremarkable, but inside I felt something gentle stirring. Maybe it was peace, or maybe it was the beginning of forgiveness for days afterward. I replayed Sophie's little voice saying, "Grandma, come back." It wasn't a demand, it was a wish. And I realized something I hadn't before. She didn't ask me to come home, she asked me to come back. Back didn't have to mean the same house, the same room, or the same routine. It could simply mean back to them, back to love, without needing to live in its center. That small difference changed everything. One afternoon, I was folding laundry when my phone buzzed. It was a message from Emily. "Mom, thank you for letting us visit last week. Sophie hasn't stopped talking about the birds at your window. She drew another picture of you today with big gray hair and cookies. She said, 'Grandma is happy.' I smiled at the screen until my eyes blurred. Then another message came, 'Would you like to come for dinner this weekend? Nothing fancy, just us.' Sophie insists she'll set the table." For a few seconds I couldn't move. I just stared at the message, feeling my heart tremble like a small bird trying to take flight. I typed back slowly, "I'd love that. Tell her I'll bring dessert." That Saturday, I took the bus to their house. The same street, the same porch, the same wind chime by the door. Everything looked the same, yet it felt entirely different. Emily opened the door. She looked surprised for a second, then smiled softly. "Hi, Mom, "Come in." Her voice was lighter this time, not strained, not cautious. I stepped inside, and the smell of something baking filled the air. "Cinnamon and vanilla, my favorite. Cookies?" She said, "Sophie's idea." I laughed, blinking away tears. Of course they were. Sophie came running in, her curls bouncing. "Grandma," she shouted, throwing her arms around my legs. She looked up with that same bright smile that could melt any sadness. "Look, Grandma," she said, pointing to the dining table. There were 3 plates, one for each of us, and in the middle, a little vase with flowers she must have picked from the yard. I bent down and whispered, "You did perfect, sweetheart." Dinner was simple: baked chicken, salad, and rolls. We talked about small things: Sophie's drawings, Daniel's work, the new daycare I was helping at. There were pauses, yes, but not the heavy kind. They were the kind that let everyone breathe. Halfway through dinner, Emily looked at me and said quietly, "I was scared, when you left. Scared I'd hurt you, and scared I'd done the right thing at the same time." I nodded. "I know, dear, I was scared too. Scared that I'd given too much, and still somehow not enough." She sighed softly. "I think we both wanted the same thing: peace. We just didn't know how to make space for it." "Yes," I said. "Sometimes love needs walls, not fences, just a little space to grow." Daniel reached across the table and covered both our hands. "Let's promise to keep this space," he said. "Not apart," I added, but balanced." He smiled, balanced. After dinner, Sophie brought out the dessert, a little chocolate cake that leaned slightly to one side. "Grandma, I made it," she announced proudly. "You'd yep." I stirred and licked the spoon. We all laughed. It felt so natural, so simple, that I almost forgot there had ever been distance between us. When it was time to leave, Emily walked me to the porch. The evening air was cool, the sky painted with streaks of purple. She hesitated before speaking. "Mom," she said, "thank you for coming. And thank you for giving us time to figure things out." I touched her arm gently. "Thank you for letting me." She looked like she wanted to say more, but instead, she just hugged me. It was the first time we'd hugged since the day I left, and it felt like forgiveness, not spoken, but understood. Back at the inn, I sat by my window again. The bird feeder was still there, the same as always, but tonight, a small family of sparrows perched together, eating side by side. No pushing, no crowding, just a quiet sharing of space. I smiled. Maybe families are like that too. We take turns at the feeder of love, trusting there will always be enough for everyone. The next few weeks, things found a new rhythm. Daniel called more often. Emily sent little updates, photos of Sophie painting, laughing, holding her toy teapot. Sometimes she'd even ask for advice again, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. "Mom, do you still add a little milk to pancake batter?" She'd text. "Yes," I'd reply, "just a splash keeps them soft." It wasn't about pancakes, it was about connection. A simple thread weaving us back together, one small message at a time. At the daycare, I began to notice the same lessons repeating themselves in tiny, innocent ways. A little boy once built a tower of blocks so tall it toppled. He looked at me disappointed. I smiled and said, "That's okay. Sometimes things fall because they're ready to be built better." He grinned and started again, and I thought to myself, that's exactly what families do. We fall, we rebuild. Not to make it the same, but to make it stronger. Then one morning I received a letter, real paper, real handwriting, from Emily. It read, "Dear Mom, I wanted to write this instead of text because it feels more real. When you left that day, I was angry at myself. I thought I had failed as a daughter-in-law and as a mother. But now I see that maybe what we needed was time to grow into each other again, not as strangers sharing a house, but as women who love the same little girl. Thank you for teaching me that love isn't about staying close, it's about staying kind. You'll always have a place here, no matter where you live. Love, Emily." I read the letter 3 times. Each time, it felt like a stitch mending something inside me. That evening, I sat on the porch of the inn with Martha. The sun dipped low, painting the sky gold. She handed me a cup of tea and said, "You look peaceful." I smiled. "I think I am," I said. "It took losing a home to find my heart again." Martha nodded. "Sometimes we have to leave love to understand it." We sat quietly after that, watching the light fade. Later that night, I wrote in my notebook again, "Turning point, the moment love stopped being a duty and became a choice. The moment I understood that leaving wasn't losing. It was trusting that love strong enough to let go will always find its way back." I closed the notebook and placed it by my bed. Outside, the wind brushed softly against the window. It sounded almost like a whisper, gentle, forgiving, and alive. The days after Emily's letter felt different, not because the world had changed, but because something inside me had softened. It was like waking up after a long rain. The same street, the same trees, but the air somehow felt new. I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside my notebook. Then I sat by the window with my coffee and whispered, "Thank you," not just to her, but to life itself for giving me a second chance to understand love the quiet way. At the daycare, I noticed I laughed more easily. The children's small joys became my medicine. Their clumsy art projects, their giggles, their endless questions about clouds and bugs and lunch. It all reminded me that life, even in its simplest form, is still full of wonder. One morning, a little boy named Henry tugged my sleeve and said, "Miss May, when are you going to be a grandma again?" I laughed a real laugh this time. "Oh, sweetheart, I already am. I just have to wait for my granddaughter to call." He grinned, satisfied with that answer. But as I walked home that day, I thought about his question. Being a grandmother wasn't just about living in the same house or baking cookies on demand. It was about being present in spirit, loving from near or far without conditions. I started keeping a small journal, writing simple lines each night, just 3 sentences a day, things I had learned or wanted to remember. Monday, sometimes silence heals more than words. Tuesday, children forgive easily, we can learn from them. Wednesday, love that lets go is not lost, it's just resting in another room. But these little sentences became like stepping stones guiding me toward peace. Emily called more often now. Sometimes just to ask for a recipe, sometimes to share Sophie's new drawings, sometimes for nothing at all. We didn't talk about the past much. We didn't need to. It was written between every kind word, every gentle pause. One evening, she called while Sophie was in the bath. "Mom," she said, "I wanted to tell you something. We're thinking about moving closer to the lake, a bigger place, more room for Sophie to play." "That sounds lovely," I said. Then she added, "There's a small cottage behind the main house. It's not much, but if you ever wanted to stay for a while, it would be yours." I didn't answer right away. I looked out my window at the fading light. The idea of living close but not too close felt like the perfect kind of peace. "That's kind of you," I said softly. "Let's see where life takes us." She smiled through the phone. "I'd like that, Mom." That night, I thought of the word home. It used to mean a place, a kitchen, a bed, familiar walls. Now it meant people, it meant voices that spoke gently. It meant being welcome without having to stay. I realized I didn't need to move back in to feel loved. I was already back in their hearts, and that was more than enough. A few weeks later, they invited me for a picnic at the park. Sophie ran ahead, chasing butterflies with a pink net that was almost bigger than she was. Daniel grilled hot dogs. Emily spread out a blanket, and I sat with a small jar of lemonade in my hands, just watching them. Emily leaned over and said quietly, "You know, she talks about you all the time. She says you're her sunset, Grandma." I smiled. "Why sunset?" "Because she says you always make her feel warm, even when the day is ending." I looked at the horizon then, soft gold melting into pink, and my eyes filled with tears. Not sad ones, the good kind. The kind that come when you finally understand you didn't lose anything, you just found a new way to love. When it was time to go, Sophie crawled into my lap, tired and happy. "Grandma," she said sleepily, "you stay here tomorrow." I kissed her forehead. "No, sweetheart, Grandma's got work tomorrow, but I'll see you soon." She frowned, then whispered, "Okay, don't forget my rainbow picture." "I never will, I promised." As they drove away, I stood there waving until the car turned out of sight. The air smelled like grass and grilled food and something sweet, contentment maybe. That evening, I returned to the inn and sat outside with Martha. The sun was setting behind the trees, the same gentle orange that had once watched me cry in a kitchen months ago. "Looks like a good day," Martha said. "Was," I replied. "A really good day?" She nodded. "Feels like you found your balance." I smiled. "I think we all have." Then I added quietly, "You know, I used to think leaving meant losing, but now I know it just meant moving the love to where it could breathe." Martha sipped her tea and said, "That's a beautiful way to put it." That night, I took out my old notebook again. The pages were nearly full now. At the top of a fresh page, I wrote, "Resolution, the heart learns to be quiet before it learns to be whole." Then I wrote, "I thought I left because I was unwanted, but I see now I left so we could all grow." Emily learned to be a mother, Daniel learned to be a husband, and I learned to be myself again. I closed the notebook gently. For the first time in years, I felt no weight in my chest. The next morning, I woke early and walked to the lake. The sky was pale blue, the kind that promises a calm day. I sat on my favorite bench, the one with the loose board, and watched the ducks glide by. A little girl from the daycare waved at me across the path. "Hi, Miss May." I waved back, smiling. As I sat there, I realized something simple and true love doesn't belong to a house. It doesn't live in walls or kitchens or bedrooms. It lives in gestures, in forgiveness, in the soft return of a voice that once went quiet, and maybe, just maybe, In the space we leave behind when we go, so others can find themselves again. When I got back to the inn, my phone buzzed. A new message from Emily. Mom, Sophie wants to know if you can come to her school's Grandparents' Day next month. She's already saving you a seat. I smiled, feeling my throat tighten in that old familiar way. I typed back I wouldn't miss it for the world. Then I set the phone down and whispered to the quiet room, I'm still her grandma, always was. That evening, I baked a batch of cookies, Sophie's favorite chocolate chip. I packed them carefully in a tin, tied it with a ribbon, and wrote a small note for my sunshine from your sunset grandma. I placed the tin on the table, ready to mail in the morning. Outside, the last light of day slipped through the window. The world was calm, my heart steady. I whispered one last thing to myself before turning off the light. Some goodbyes are not endings, they're gentle hellos from a different distance. And with that, I smiled, because I finally understood I didn't lose my family. I simply learned how to love them from the quiet place where love grows best, freely, patiently, and without fear. The morning of Sophie's Grandparents' Day arrived with soft sunlight streaming through my curtains. I woke early, not from an alarm, but from that gentle excitement that lives between the heart and the throat. I had already pressed my dress the night before, light blue with small white flowers. Sophie once told me it was her favorite because it looked like the sky. I packed the cookies I'd baked, the same chocolate chip ones that made her eyes sparkle, and took the early bus to the city. As it rolled down the familiar streets, I watched the houses pass by one, the same way they had on the day I left. But this time, my heart wasn't heavy, it was calm. Leaving once had felt like losing everything. Now, coming back felt like simply returning to love that had never truly left. When I reached the school, children's laughter filled the air. Parents and grandparents stood around the playground holding balloons and flowers. It smelled like crayons in spring. Then I saw her. My little Sophie standing by her classroom door in a yellow dress, her curls bouncing as she waved. Grandma, she shouted, her voice ringing clear and bright. I barely had time to open my arms before she ran into them, wrapping me in a hug that felt like sunlight itself. You came, she said, her face pressed against my neck. Of course I did, I whispered. I told you I'd never miss it. Emily and Daniel were there too, standing a little to the side, smiling. Emily looked at me, her eyes soft and steady. I'm glad you came, she said. I'm glad you asked, I replied. We stood there for a moment, quiet, no awkwardness, no old walls, just mutual understanding. Time had done its quiet work. Forgiveness had taken root in the space we once filled with silence. Inside the classroom, Sophie showed me her drawings, houses, trees, stick figure families. In every one of them, there was always a small woman with gray hair standing close to the sun. That's you, she said proudly. Grandma Sunshine, I laughed, brushing away a tear. I thought I was Sunset Grandma. She shook her head. You're both. You're sunshine in the morning and sunset at night. I kissed the top of her head and whispered, then I must be very lucky. The teacher asked the children to sing a small song for their families. Their tiny voices filled the room like bells, off-key, messy, beautiful. I watched Sophie sing with all her heart, her hands clapping off beat, and I felt something gentle and full bloom inside me. It wasn't pride, it wasn't nostalgia, it was gratitude, the kind that sits deep in the soul, quiet but unshackable. After the performance, we all gathered in the cafeteria. I placed my tin of cookies on the table, and soon little hands reached for them eagerly. Emily tried one and smiled. You still make them better than anyone. I chuckled. It's just butter and love, dear. Lots of love. Our Daniel sat beside me, balancing Sophie on his knee. Mom, he said, we've been thinking we're moving to that new place next month. It's closer to the lake. Maybe once we're settled, you could visit for a few days. Sophie's already planning adventures. I smiled. I'd love that. Emily nodded, her eyes warm. We want you to see the garden. Sophie's planting sunflowers. She said they're for you. I looked at my granddaughter and whispered, then I'll bring my watering can. That night, back at the inn, I sat on my porch under a soft, quiet sky. The moon hung low, its light spreading across the lake in gentle ripples. Crickets chirped somewhere in the tall grass, and the air smelled faintly of rain and wildflowers. I opened my notebook one last time. The pages were full now, my thoughts, my heartbreak, my healing, and every small piece of wisdom I had gathered along the way. On the very last page, I wrote, ending, love does not live in walls, but in hearts, and sometimes the most beautiful part of love is knowing when to step back, so others can step forward. I left their house, but not their lives. I gave them space, and in that space, we found peace. Home is not a place I go back to. It's the warmth I carry inside me, and the love that always finds its way back, even when spoken in whispers. I closed the notebook and looked up at the stars. They shimmered like tiny reminders that even in the darkest nights, light never really leaves. It just waits for us to look up again. In that stillness, I thought of my husband. I imagined him sitting beside me, his arm draped over my shoulder like he used to. I could almost hear him say, "You did good, honey. You let them grow," and I smiled, because I knew he'd be proud. Before going inside, I whispered one final thought into the night, for Emily, for Daniel, for Sophie, and for anyone who's ever had to walk away quietly. Love doesn't always mean holding on. Sometimes means letting go softly, without bitterness, without noise, and trusting that what's real will return when it's ready. The wind stirred through the trees as if it was answering me, and in that quiet moment, I felt at peace. The next morning, I woke early to the sound of birds at the feeder outside my window, tiny wings fluttering in the morning light. I brewed my coffee, opened the door, and stepped into the fresh air. The world was simple again, just as it was always meant to be. Somewhere far off, I imagined Sophie laughing, Emily cooking, Daniel mowing the lawn, living, loving, growing, and I realized that's all I ever wanted. I took a slow sip of my coffee and whispered to myself, I did what I came to do, then I smiled. Because this calm, steady morning was the quiet kind of happy I had been searching for all along.